Today is Thursday, April 30th, and I want to tell you about a pipeline that was buried in the Saudi desert 45 years ago and a canal that is now being planned through a mountain range, and why the combination of these two things represents a more devastating strategic defeat for Iran than anything that has happened in 2 months of active warfare. Because while everyone has been watching the carrier strike groups and the nuclear negotiations and the IRGC's internal coup, the most consequential strategic transformation of this crisis has been happening quietly, underground, and in government planning offices where engineers are doing math that keeps Iranian strategists awake at night. Let me tell you what Iran actually built its power on, because you need to understand the weapon before you can understand what it means to cancel it. For 4 decades, the Islamic Republic possessed one card above all others. Not its army, which the United States just demonstrated it could destroy from the air, not its nuclear program, which is now buried under rubble and the subject of a negotiation it does not fully control, not its proxy network, which is expensive, fractured, and increasingly uncertain about the value of Iranian backing. The single most powerful leverage point in Iran's entire strategic arsenal was geography. 21 miles of water at the Strait of Hormuz's narrowest point. Through that corridor, before this war began, flowed 20 million barrels of oil every single day. That is 20% of the entire world's seaborne oil trade. Saudi crude, UAE crude, Kuwaiti crude, Qatari liquefied natural gas, Iraqi oil, all of it passing within missile range of Iranian coastal batteries, within fast boat range of IRGC naval units, within mine-laying range of vessels that could close the channel in hours. For 40 years, Iran's implicit threat in every negotiation, every confrontation, every nuclear standoff, every sanctions discussion was this: push us too hard and we close the strait. We will hold the entire global economy hostage, and nobody will be able to stop us. In 2026, Iran played that card. It actually closed the strait. The IRGC announced on March 4th that ships attempting to transit would be set ablaze. They were not bluffing. By March 12th, 21 commercial vessels had been attacked, 5 crew members killed. Tanker traffic dropped 70%. The route that had seen more than 100 ships transit daily recorded 0 transits on March 14th, a first in recorded history. Over 600 vessels were stranded, approximately 270 of them linked to China or carrying Chinese-bound cargo, representing 37 to 45% of all normal Hormuz traffic. Oil surged from $65 to above $100 a barrel. The IEA described it as the largest single energy disruption in recorded history, calculating a daily global supply loss of 8 million barrels. Europe and Asia in energy crisis, supply chains collapsing, inflation spiking, developing nations hit with costs their economies could not absorb. This was exactly what Iran had been threatening for 4 decades. It finally materialized. And then something Iran had not fully calculated came into operation. In 1981, during the Iran-Iraq War, while tankers were being sunk and Gulf ports bombed, someone in Riyadh asked a quiet question: what do we do if the Strait of Hormuz actually closes? The answer was a 1,200-kilometer pipeline. Saudi Arabia began construction of the Petroline, formerly the East-West crude oil pipeline, running from Abqaiq, Saudi Arabia's largest oil processing facility in the eastern province, all the way to the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea, a route that bypassed the Strait of Hormuz completely, never touching the Persian Gulf, never entering Iranian missile range, never passing within reach of a single IRGC fast boat. For 45 years, that pipeline operated below capacity. It could handle 7 million barrels per day. It typically moved 770,000. Some called it an unnecessary insurance premium against a scenario that would never materialize. The strait had never actually closed. Why maintain infrastructure for a fantasy? On March 10, 2026, Saudi Aramco CEO Amin Nasser announced the Petroline was being brought to full operational capacity. 5 million barrels per day shifted from Hormuz to the Red Sea essentially overnight. An asset that had looked like overinvestment for 45 years became a lifeline for the global economy within 72 hours of Iran executing the threat it had spent 4 decades building. The UAE had made the same calculation. The Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, also called the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, runs from Abu Dhabi's inland oil fields to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, bypassing the strait entirely, capacity of 1.5 million barrels per day. Like the Saudi Petroline, it had operated at a fraction of capacity before the crisis. When the strait closed, the UAE activated it simultaneously with Saudi Arabia, combined bypass capacity between 8.5 and 9 million barrels per day. That does not cover the full 21 million barrels that previously transited the strait. Iraq's 4 million barrels per day, Kuwait's 2 million, Qatar's enormous LNG exports. None of these have equivalent bypass infrastructure. Al Jazeera, citing energy analyst George Voloshin, noted that the combined pipeline capacity covers only about 9 million of the 20 million barrels that previously moved through Hormuz. S&P Global reported the current disruption was removing 17 million barrels a day from global markets at peak. The bypass cushioned the blow. It did not eliminate it, but here is the strategic point that matters. Saudi Arabia's oil kept flowing, 7 million barrels per day, going to Yanbu, to the Red Sea, to global buyers, without passing anywhere near Iranian territorial waters. Iran closed the strait and trapped everyone inside it, including itself. Iran's own oil exports, 2 to 3 million barrels per day, were trapped behind the blockade it created. Its daily economic loss reached $3 to $4 billion. Its oil revenue, which funded 40% of the regime's budget, dropped towards zero. Iran's mutual destruction strategy, I will burn, but I will take the world down with me, was exposed as asymmetric in the wrong direction. The Petroline had already redirected the river. The world was shaken but did not collapse. And the Gulf states drew a conclusion that is now reshaping the physical geography of the region. The Petroline proved the concept. The concept needs to be completed. Because the existing bypass network, as real and as functional as it is, covers only about half the previous Hormuz traffic volume. The gap is approximately 12 million barrels per day. Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar have no serious bypass infrastructure, and the pipelines that do exist are land-based static targets within Iranian missile and drone range. Al Jazeera reported that throughout this war, energy infrastructure across the Gulf has come under sustained attack. A pipeline is easier to find than a ship and harder to replace. The bypass is necessary but insufficient. What comes next is the engineering discussion that began as theoretical curiosity and has now become the most urgently studied strategic infrastructure project in the world. The Musandam Canal. Look at a map of the Gulf. Find the Musandam Peninsula. It is that sharp finger of Omani and UAE territory that juts northward toward the Strait of Hormuz at the very top of the Arabian Peninsula. Now measure the distance between the Persian Gulf coast on one side of that peninsula and the Gulf of Oman coast on the other side. The distance at the narrowest point between the UAE coast near Ras Al Khaimah and the Gulf of Oman coast near Dibba is approximately 38 kilometers, 24 miles. The Panama Canal is 80 kilometers. The Suez Canal is nearly 200. A canal cut through the Musandam Peninsula would be one of the shorter mega canal projects in modern history. And the destination for tankers exiting through it would be Khor Fakkan and Fujairah, already operational deepwater ports on the Gulf of Oman coast, already handling diverted traffic from the crisis, already beyond Iranian interdiction range in the strait. A ship leaving Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, or the UAE through the Musandam Canal would never enter the Strait of Hormuz, never come within range of Iranian coastal missiles, never pass through mined waters, never be threatened by a single IRGC fast boat. Iran's entire arsenal for Hormuz control, 6,000 naval mines optimized for shallow confined waters, fast boats designed for the strait's specific dimensions, coastal missile batteries zeroed on shipping lanes, becomes militarily irrelevant. Weapons without strategic targets are expensive scrap metal. You cannot mine a waterway that ships no longer use. Arab news, Gulf News, and engineering journals have all covered the proposal with serious analytical treatment since the crisis began. The cost estimate, $200 billion in 2008 terms, according to a Dubai government feasibility study, has been widely cited. Arab News noted the current cost would be many multiples north of that figure given construction inflation and the geological complexity involved. Gulf News reported that the Hajar Mountains along the route rise to 3,000 meters in places and that the rock is composed of ophiolite and limestone formations, among the hardest geological materials on Earth for this type of excavation. Experienced engineers describe the challenge bluntly. The Panama Canal's recent expansion cost $5 billion. The Musandam Canal's geological complexity, depth requirements, and seismic exposure multiply that figure by 40 to 60 times by the most conservative engineering estimates. The canal must be at least 25 meters deep and 200 to 300 meters wide to accommodate modern, very large crude carriers. Hundreds of millions of tons of extremely hard mountain rock must be blasted, cut, and removed. Arab News cited one engineer who called the comments about it being easier than making peace with Iran, quote, among the kinder criticisms. But here is what has changed since every previous time this idea was floated and abandoned. The 2026 crisis made the cost argument obsolete, not because the numbers got smaller, because the cost of not building it just became measurable in real time. The IEA calculated 8 million barrels per day removed from global markets at peak disruption. Multiply that by the duration of the crisis and the price per barrel, and you reach numbers that dwarf even the most expensive canal estimates. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are not evaluating the Musandam Canal against the cost of building it. They are evaluating it against the cost of not having built it when Iran closed the strait in March 2026. That calculation has permanently changed. The alternative route avoids the Hajar Mountains entirely at the cost of distance. The empty quarter canal concept, based on a 2008 Saudi-backed feasibility study cited by Gulf News, proposes a 950-kilometer channel starting at Saudi Arabia's southern coast, crossing the Rub al-Khali Desert and reaching the Gulf of Oman. No mountains, flat terrain, geologically far more manageable than Musandam. But 950 kilometers of open desert canal in one of the world's most extreme environments creates different problems. Water evaporation rates in the Rub al-Khali require continuous fresh water input. Silting in desert wind conditions is severe. Elevations of up to 700 meters along parts of the route mean the flat desert perception is misleading. And the route's proximity to the Yemen border creates a security vulnerability that no engineering plan eliminates. The canal would exit within Houthi missile range. Both routes are now being actively studied at government level in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Oman. The crisis compressed the timeline from theoretical engineering exercise to urgent strategic priority. And this is the dimension of the story that goes beyond the immediate war. What Saudi Arabia and the UAE are building. The existing pipeline network already operational, the port upgrades at Khor Fakkan and Fujairah already underway, the canal studies now progressing from feasibility to serious government planning, is not just an infrastructure project. It is the permanent cancellation of a 40-year strategic weapon. Iran's Hormuz card operated on a credibility mechanism. The threat was sufficient to constrain Western military behavior because the consequences of the strait's closure were catastrophic enough to be deterrent. That required the catastrophe to maintain its magnitude. The Petroline reduced the catastrophe's magnitude. The UAE pipeline reduced it further. The Musandam Canal, if built, eliminates it entirely. When tankers stop transiting the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's entire arsenal of Hormuz-optimized weapons becomes geopolitically irrelevant. You cannot threaten to mine a waterway that the global economy no longer routes through. You cannot hold energy markets hostage through a strait that has been bypassed. Geography without economic consequence is not a weapon. It is a landscape. The strategic implication for Iran is more devastating than any battlefield loss. Its nuclear program is buried under rubble. Its conventional military has been severely degraded. Its economy is in freefall, with President Pezeshkian himself warning of complete collapse within 3 weeks. Its IRGC is executing an internal coup that is simultaneously destroying Iran's negotiating position. And now the geographic card that gave Iran leverage in every interaction for 4 decades, the one card that survived sanctions, survived strikes, survived everything, is being rendered obsolete by construction equipment in a desert and engineering studies in a mountain range. Let me put numbers on what the Hormuz closure actually cost the countries most dependent on the strait, because those numbers explain why the bypass investment is accelerating rather than stalling. China imports over 10 million barrels of oil per day, with between 35 and 45% of that volume normally transiting Hormuz. Beijing has approximately 90 days of strategic petroleum reserves. Those reserves are finite, and they are being drawn down right now. Every week, the strait remains disrupted, deepens China's energy dependency on Russia at increasingly unfavorable terms, reshaping the Eurasian power balance in ways that Beijing did not choose and cannot easily reverse. Japan, which scaled back its nuclear capacity after Fukushima and shifted heavily to liquefied natural gas and oil imports, faces energy security constraints that directly threaten its industrial base. South Korea's semiconductor manufacturing sector, among the most energy-intensive industrial operations on Earth and a critical node in the global technology supply chain, requires uninterrupted energy supply at scale. Samsung and SK Hynix factories slowing or shutting down means disruption not just of Korean industry, but of the technology supply chains that run through every major economy on Earth. India, the world's third largest oil importer, had been purchasing heavily discounted Iranian crude before the war. Now it faces full market prices for alternatives from Nigeria, Angola, and Brazil on routes that add 15 to 20 additional days of transit time and substantially higher logistics costs. These are the countries that will fund the bypass infrastructure directly or indirectly through the premium pricing that guaranteed secure Gulf supply commands. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are not merely selling oil through the alternative routes. They are selling something more valuable than oil. They are selling the guarantee of an uninterrupted, secure, and blackmail-free energy flow. Gulf capital is transforming from a resource exporter into an infrastructure exporter, building the reliability that energy-dependent economies will pay sustained premium prices to access. Iran cannot unbuild the Petroline, cannot prevent the port upgrades at Fujairah, cannot stop the canal studies from becoming canal plans and canal plans from becoming excavation contracts. The threat is being canceled not through confrontation, but through construction. And the 2026 crisis will be remembered ultimately not for the missiles or the blockades or the ceasefire negotiations, but for the moment when the Gulf states decided that no future Iranian government, no future IRGC commander, no future supreme leader would ever again hold the global economy hostage through a 21-mile stretch of water. The engineers are already in the mountains. The question is not whether the canal will be built. The question is how long it takes. And in that calculation, every day Iran spends making demands it cannot enforce is another day closer to the moment when the demands become permanently irrelevant.